My name's Emma and I'm a counsellor and a coach, and I run mental health and empowerment programs. So I was bullied on and off as a young girl, and I think the on and off piece is probably what was most significant, because what that meant was that I developed a real sense of insecurity. I didn't know on any given day whether or not I was going to fit in, or whether or not I was going to be targeted, or whether I was going to have a good day or a bad day. And what that meant was that I became incredibly anxious as a young child. The bullying varied from the kids making up songs and singing them about me in the playground, to being excluded from games, sleepovers, parties, being the last one picked on the soccer team. I experienced days where my school bag would be hidden, things would be put in my lunch. It was fairly traumatic, and I didn't ever really know what was coming and who it was coming from, and when essentially it was going to happen. But ultimately, yeah, it was day in and day out for a fairly long length of time. I felt incredibly insecure. I felt like there was something wrong with me as to why it was I was continuously being targeted. So what I learned really early on was that to be myself meant that I would automatically become the victim of bullying. So I didn't want to be myself. I wanted to be anything but myself, and do anything that I could possibly do to be able to fit in and to be liked. So my anxiety in my teenage years quickly turned into sort of like an anxiety-fueled depression, where I essentially gave up on life. I didn't have any energy for things. I didn't want to take part in the day-to-day anymore. I completely believed by the age of around about 16 that I wouldn't amount to anything, so I didn't want to have a shot at anything anymore. I was put on significant dose of antidepressants at the age of 15, and it was a really difficult time, not only for myself but for my family as well, because I had once been a fairly outgoing, upbeat, engaged child, to being completely disengaged and completely unwilling to take part in life. By the time I was 19, things weren't getting any better. They were actually getting a lot worse. I was struggling with crippling depression. I was making choices that were far from good ones, and ultimately my life was in disarray, to the point where at the age of 20 I suffered with a complete mental breakdown. The mental breakdown was characterised by a psychotic illness, whereby I experienced deep episodes of psychotic hallucinations and delusions that lasted on and off for over 12 months. Psychosis is an illness that's characterised by hallucinations and delusions, and in my case, my hallucinations were very severe and very traumatic. One of my psychotic hallucinations that lasted for several weeks meant that everybody around me actually appeared to be dead, and I was the only lone survivor. So in appearing to be dead, they looked like zombies. They looked like they had literally arisen from the grave, with parts of their faces missing, parts of their bodies missing. I could see things, smell things, hear things, touch things that were in fact not real, but were as real to me then within the episode as sitting here is with you now. So the experience of psychosis was incredibly traumatic. It triggers the same experience in your physicality, in your body, as if it's going on in real life. So I would scream a lot, cry a lot, run a lot, hide a lot, behave really erratically in order to get away from my fear. And it was as real for my body as it was for my mind that was going through it at the time. My experience led me to become a ward of the state and have to be institutionalised. It was the hospital care that I required the most. My parents did everything that they could to keep me at home and keep me in care, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. My situation required that level of institutionalised care, and I was made a ward of the state shortly after my 20th birthday, and I spent the good part of a year recovering within the system. One of the most confronting things about my experience was being in hospital, being in institutionalised care in a psychiatric ward. It was incredibly frightening to have to come to terms with that situation, the people in there, the level of care that's supplied, because ultimately we were all clinically insane. The difference between institutionalised or care now or being in a mental hospital now is that patients are typically put in their own rooms, it's segregated, and there's I guess a better level of care applied to each individual case. Whereas when I experienced institutionalised care, everybody was in amongst it. It was a bit of a free-for-all. So I would wake up in the middle of the night and have different men sitting on the end of my bed. I was still seriously drugged up and sedated whilst I was inside, so it was very difficult to make sense of what was going on around me and to put the pieces together and establish why it was I was there. So that in itself, the unknown and the fear of what was going on around me without being able to properly understand it was incredibly traumatic. It was a long process of recovery for me, and it was a process. It started by me being released from hospital into a private hospital, where by then I became an outpatient and I had to engage in regular group therapy and keeping up my care under a psychiatrist and psychologist. This was really difficult for me because now I got to understand the depth of my illness, and now I was forced to come to terms with a new body, having put on over 25 kilos due to antipsychotic medication. I had to come to terms with the fact that I would now be on a disability pension. I would have to resit my driver's license. I would have to restart at university. I had lost a lot of my friends during that process because mental illness, as severe as mine was incredibly difficult for young people to have to come to terms with as well. I found myself once again in a position of incredible self-loathing, having to come to terms with my illness and my situation. Once again, I felt incredibly lost. I was looking for love, and I was looking for affection, and I was looking for acceptance in another human being, and I got myself involved in a relationship and fell pregnant. And that pregnancy was incredibly confronting for everybody, particularly my family and my medical health team, and so they hosted an intervention in order to try to prevent me from proceeding with the pregnancy. But every inch of me believed that this was the right decision, even though it didn't make any sense for a mental patient to go ahead with a pregnancy. I was of age to be able to make that decision and no longer under guardianship, and so that was what I proceeded with. So this pregnancy I wholeheartedly believed was a miracle, and it was the catalyst that meant that I became very serious about getting well. I didn't want to have to continue to live the life that I was living, and what went with that was accepting that diagnosis. I went about a complete lifestyle change whereby I changed my diet significantly, I engaged in regular exercise, I found my faith, I practiced yoga, I started Pilates, I essentially surrounded myself with positive people, and I did everything I could, not for my own sake anymore, but for the sake of my unborn child. I wanted to be able to provide for him the best possible shot at life, and I took that very seriously. I gave birth to my son Gabriel, and it was from that point on that my entire life opened up. All of the work that I had done to maintain and sustain my mental health was paying off, and no amount of stress or pressure that a new baby could bring would change the bond that we've had, and also the effect that he's had on my health in a positive way and my life. I'm now a mum of 3. I've got 2 sons and a daughter, and they're all happy and healthy, and so am I. I went on to study psychological science and I did a diploma in nutritional medicine as well. Definitely my passion for life is around helping others and empowering others in the mental health space. I run emotional intelligence and resilience programs for teenagers in schools. The program's called The New Brave, and I run programs for both girls and for boys. Largely the focus is on how to have a healthy relationship with yourself, on growing your self-worth, and on understanding how it means to live wholeheartedly and to live from the heart. It's how we feel about ourselves that governs all of the decisions we ultimately make in our life, and there's not much of a focus around that kind of education in our current school system. So that's why I'm hustling for change in that space, and I've brought that program to life. It's been a long road, and I essentially decided that the best way I could convey my message and my learnings was through actually writing my own mental health memoir. So I'm really pleased to announce that my book, Total Head Case, will be coming out in the coming months, and it's available for pre-order. It is a very deep, often dark, but true to life experience as to what it's like to be psychotic. So, and essentially what it's like to have been me, and what it's like to have gone through that experience, and all of the learnings and the lessons and what my life now looks like today. The top 3 things that I've learned about life and about the world and about myself. I'm going to start with what I've learned about my life. What I've learned about life in general actually is that life is challenging and that it's hard. But in fact, it's from those struggles and those challenges that we get to learn the most about ourselves. It's also through our struggles and our challenges that we get an opportunity to unite together. And I'm a firm believer that we do our healing best when we're together. What I've learned about the world is that the world is in dire need of more emotionally intelligent leadership right now. And what that means really is just people who are willing to live from their heart. I don't think that necessarily needs to be complicated. For me, it looks like a willingness to be still and to be present and to be willing to drown out the noise. And when I do that, I noticed all around me many opportunities to be able to contribute. And that's what good heart leadership's all about. And thirdly, what I've learned about myself is that this has been a long journey of self-acceptance. That if I haven't been willing to accept what's happened to me, then I wouldn't be willing to accept all that I have become. And if I hadn't been willing to accept what had happened to me, I wouldn't be who I am here today. So that's what this has all been for me. It's about self-acceptance.